The rain started at midnight. Not a hard rain, but the kind that patters against the tent with a soft, insistent rhythm, the kind that lulls you to sleep. For Mark, it was a welcome sound. He zipped his sleeping bag up to his chin, listening to the gentle patter mixed with the slow, deep breathing of his girlfriend, Sarah, beside him. They were alone, deep in the backcountry of the Smokies, miles from the nearest trailhead. It was perfect. Until the pattering stopped. The silence was what woke him. It was absolute, unnatural. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, pressing in on your eardrums. Mark opened his eyes to pitch blackness. He lay still, straining to hear anything, the rustle of a leaf, the hoot of an owl. Nothing. Then, he heard it. A soft, wet footstep just outside the tent. Squish. Squish. His blood turned to ice. It wasn't an animal. And animals are lighter, quicker. This was the deliberate, heavy tread of something bipedal. Something large. It circled the tent, once, twice. He could hear the subtle brush of its body against the nylon, could see its shadow, a deeper black against the dark fabric, blocking out the faint starlight. He didn't dare move. He didn't dare breathe. He could feel Sarah's body, still intense beside him. She was awake too. A hand found his under the sleeping bag and squeezed, a silent, terrified question. He squeezed back, a silent command, "Don't move." The footsteps stopped at the foot of their tent. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Then, a low, guttural sniffing sound. It was right where Mark's head lay, only a thin layer of nylon separating them. He could smell it now, a foul, wet earth stench, like something that had been buried and dug up. The sniffing moved to the side of the tent, following the curve of the fabric. It paused at the small mesh window, left unzipped for ventilation. Mark watched in horror as a shape blotted out the gray of the mesh. It wasn't a bear's snout. It wasn't a deer's head. It was a pale, almost human-looking face, pressed against the screen, trying to see inside. He never saw its eyes. Just the vague outline of a head, too large, with matted hair plastered to its temples. It stayed there for what felt like an eternity, its breath fogging faintly in the cold air that seeped through the mesh. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sniffing stopped. The shadow pulled back. The footsteps, now quicker, crunched on the dry leaves and faded into the woods. The silence remained for another hour, but Mark and Sarah didn't sleep. They lay frozen, hands clenched, waiting for the sun to finally, mercifully, rise. The forest has a way of playing tricks on you. A root becomes a snake, a shadow becomes a man. But the forest doesn't leave a handprint. Jake had been an experienced solo hiker for years. He knew the White Mountains like the back of his hand. He knew to hang his food, to pitch his tent on high ground, to respect the weather. On this trip, he found the perfect spot, a small, flat clearing nestled in a grove of pines, a perfect circle of soft needles. He set up his tent, ate a cold dinner to avoid attracting animals, and settled into his sleeping bag as dusk fell. He was reading a book on his e-reader, the small blue light his only companion, when he heard it. A low, guttural growl, so close it seemed to vibrate through the ground and into his bones. It wasn't a growl of a curious raccoon or a distant bear. This was a sound of pure, focused territorial threat. He froze, the e-reader clutched in his hand. The growling continued, a constant, rumbling snarl from just outside the tent wall to his left. He could hear the heavy, agitated breathing of a large animal. Bear, his mind screamed. Definitely a bear. He remembered the rules, make yourself big, make noise. But he was trapped in a nylon cocoon. He grabbed his trekking pole and slammed it against the tent floor, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Hey! Get out of here! Go on!" The growling stopped. He heard a heavy body shift, a huff of breath, and then the sound of something large crashing through the undergrowth, moving away. He waited, heart hammering, for 20 minutes. Silence. He let out a shaky breath, his body flooding with relief. Then he saw the light from his e-reader flicker. He looked down. The screen was going haywire, lines of static and gibberish characters flashing across it. He tapped it, trying to reset it, and in the strobing blue light, he saw it. Pressed against the thin nylon of his tent wall, directly where the growling had been, was a hand. It was huge, with long, dirt-caked fingers and black, jagged nails. It was pressed flat against the fabric, as if feeling for a weak point. It wasn't a bear's paw. It was a hand. A human hand. But impossibly large. Jake's scream died in his throat. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The hand slowly dragged down the side of the tent, the nylon screeching under the pressure, leaving a long, shallow gouge in its wake. It reached the bottom, and then it was gone. He didn't sleep. He sat in the middle of his tent, clutching his knife, staring at the spot until the gray light of dawn finally seeped through the trees. When he felt brave enough, he unzipped the tent and crawled out. The ground around his tent was churned up. They were huge, deep footprints in the soft pine needles. They were vaguely human in shape, but at least 18 inches long, with toes that looked more like claws. But it was what he found on his tent that made him pack his gear and hike out 10 miles without stopping, not even for water. Pressed into the dirt and grime on the outside of the nylon was a perfect, muddy handprint. He put his own hand up to it. His fingers didn't even reach the first knuckle of the print. The old trapper's cabin was a blessing. Lost, out of food, and with a storm rolling in, Liam and his younger brother, Leo, were desperate. The cabin was ramshackle, its windows dark and door hanging by one leather hinge, but it was shelter. The ceiling was low and slanted, the floor was hard-packed dirt, and it smelled of rotting wood and animal droppings. But it was dry. They gathered enough wood for a small fire in the stone hearth, the smoke finding its way out through a hole in the roof. They ate the last of their granola bars and huddled by the flames, the wind howling outside like a living thing. The storm raged for hours, and eventually, exhaustion won. They fell asleep, backs against the wall, the fire dying down to glowing embers. Liam woke to the cold. The fire was out, and the cabin was pitch black. He blinked, trying to adjust, and saw a faint, orange glow coming from the window. The storm had passed, and a sliver of moon was rising. He was about to nudge Leo, to suggest they get some real sleep, when he saw it. In the corner of the cabin, opposite the door, was a small, child-sized rocking chair. He hadn't noticed it before. It must have been hidden in the shadows. And now, in the faint moonlight, it was rocking. Slowly. Gently. Back and forth, with no one in it. He stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The chair creaked softly on the dirt floor, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. Creak. 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 He wanted to shout, to run, but he was paralyzed. He watched the chair rock for what felt like an hour, the gentle motion a stark contrast to the terror freezing his blood. Then, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. He stared at the empty corner, waiting. And then, from the darkness beside the chair, a small voice whispered. "Play with me." It was a child's voice, high and sweet, but cold as the grave. It came from the empty air. Liam finally found his voice, a choked gasp escaping his lips. He shook Leo violently. "Leo! Leo, wake up!" Leo stirred, groggy. "Wah? Liam, what's wrong?" Before Liam could answer, the voice came again, closer this time. It seemed to be right next to Leo's ear. "Play with me." Leo screamed, a high-pitched, terrified shriek. They scrambled to their feet, kicking over their packs. Liam grabbed the door and yanked it open. They tumbled out into the cold, moonlit night, not stopping, not looking back. They ran through the wet forest, branches whipping their faces, thorns tearing at their clothes, until they burst onto a Forest Service road and flagged down a startled park ranger at dawn. They told the ranger their story, babbling about the cabin and the voice. The ranger, a weathered man with kind eyes, listened patiently. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That cabin," he said finally, his voice low. "A family used to trap out of there, 50, 60 years ago. A man, his wife, and their little girl." He looked at them, his expression grim. "One winter, the girl got sick. Real sick. A bad fever. The storm that year was the worst on record. Lasted 2 weeks. By the time they could get her out, it was too late." Liam and Leo stared at him, the blood draining from their faces. "They buried her somewhere out there, near the cabin," the ranger continued, shaking his head slowly. "Folks say she never really left. Just sits in her little chair, waiting for someone to come play."